Bonjour, bonjour, welcome everyone. Je suis très heureuse d'ouvrir ce deuxième webinaire, qui est placé sous la responsabilité de Pedro Lorente. Alors, ce webinaire, il est en anglais, mais vous pouvez poser vos questions en français et en espagnol. Pedro Lorente parle très bien le français, l'espagnol, il traduira
Espagnol mieux.
pour vous. Vous pouvez aussi poser vos questions sur le chat. Donc, I'm very proud to open this second webinar, which is under the supervision of Pedro Lorente. The webinar is in English, as you know, but you can ask your questions in French and in Spanish. Pedro Lorente speaks French very well, and also Spanish, of course. He can translate for you. You can also write your questions on chat. Pedro, it's your turn. I let you introduce the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
And have a good time.
Just a few words to say that I'm very proud, I'm very happy to coordinate this second round of the seminar belonging to this project about public art and the issues of musealization of art in the public sphere. The first one was in April about museums, open-air museums in university campuses, and now we are going to approach this from the point of view of former country houses converted into open-air museums. And we have with us two very, I think, representative examples as key studies. On the one hand, the Middelheim Museum in Antwerp. On the other hand, Oronsko, Polish Sculpture Park. Well, we keep saying Sculpture Park, but it's properly a museum, and is one of the issues we're going to discuss today. Before I present the two speakers and give them the time to speak, let me also introduce Nicole Gesché-Koning, who is also coordinating with me this talk. She's honorary professor of the Belgian Academy of Fine Arts, and she's been for many years in charge of heading the Museum Education Committee in ICOM. So I'm very happy to have this good friend of mine with me to enlighten the conversation afterwards. And then, yes, with no further presentation,
you can hear
so
me.
Maria is a research fellow at the Jagiellonian University, and her topic is acclaimed for avant-garde and museums of the avant-garde in East Europe to be centered in the international attention. So I think it's a good opportunity, to bring about this topic. As you see, Oronsko is one of her case studies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I will definitely take less than 30 minutes. And just to say in advance, Orońsko does not belong to ICOM. So the small village of Orońsko is located 120 kilometers south of Warsaw and can be reached by car in about an hour and a half. The center of Polish sculpture has been located on the former 19th century estate of the painter Józef Brand since 1965, and the complex includes a palace, chapel, outbuilding, coach house, blacksmith's shop, granary, stable, and barn, all set within a park featuring a water system and sculptures. And the historic palace, orangery, and other buildings serve as exhibition pavilions and sculpture studios, all nestled within a picturesque landscape park. The park itself spans 13 hectares and features a sculpture exhibition designed by Grzegorz Kowalski. Before we explore the park, however, let me briefly introduce each of the buildings one by one. So the chapel is the oldest historical building within the grounds of the center. This neoclassical structure, inspired by the architecture of Greek temples, was built in 1841 as a manor chapel. From 1957 to 77, it served as the parish church for the residents of Orońsko. After being deconsecrated in 1978, the chapel was transformed into an exhibition space and has operated as the chapel gallery since '87. This gallery hosts small-scale art projects that are deeply connected to the original atmosphere of the space, characterized by its air of mystery and solemnity. It typically features individual, site-specific, or commemorative exhibitions. The orangery, constructed after 1869, based on a design by Alfred Chopin, was originally a winter garden. It was occasionally used by Joseph Brandt, along with his students and friends, as painting studio. The building underwent two reconstructions between '86 and '87, and then again 2008-2010, based on preserved documentation. Today, it functions as a distinctive exhibition space, benefiting from abundant natural light and the seamless connection between its interior and the surrounding landscape. The coach house, built 1905 in the western part of the manor complex, alongside former farm buildings, originally housed spacious rooms for coaches, as well as a workshop, kitchen, and living quarters. Today, it serves as a gallery dedicated to Magdalena Abakanowicz, one of Poland's most renowned artists. At the heart of the permanent exhibition is Ukon, from her war games series, which Abakanowicz donated to the center. This remarkable series, created from monumental tree trunks Abakanowicz discovered, is one of her most intriguing works. The massive branches, once victims of roadside cuttings, were either enclosed in steel rings or delicately wrapped in linen. Ukon was produced between '94 and '95 in the Orońsko studios, with the creative process documented and displayed in the coach house using light boxes. The piece rests on an open-work steel base, and its title evokes primitive languages and rituals, themes that often influence the artist. Resembling a war machine, Ukon compels viewers to reflect on the oppressiveness of the modern world and serves as a testament of humanity's aggression towards nature. Sculpture's House, after extensive renovation, this building was designed by a sculptor and architect Zbigniew Maleszewski, and during the major renovation from 1985 to '87, the interiors were redesigned to function as a hotel. An annex was added in place of the former cellar in the northern part of the building, and in 2008, a large rooftop terrace was converted into a glass pavilion, which can now be used as an additional exhibition space. And the historical manor park in Orońsko, designed in the English style in the early 19th century, spans into 12.3 hectares. Its landscape was shaped to harmonize with the natural terrain, featuring trees planted in an informal layout, creates scenic views and structured avenues. The park's design contrasts wooded areas with open lawns and meadows. Since its early days, art has been an integral part of the park, with Cristiani, who was the very first owner of the manor, introducing the first sculptures in the early 19th century, 7 of which have survived to this day. The park, also home to numerous towering white elm trees, a species that is gradually vanishing in Europe. Today, the park serves as an exhibition space for both Polish and international artists and hosts various workshops and symposiums. Scattered throughout are over 100 works, which form either part of a permanent collection or temporary exhibits, showcasing a wide range of styles, materials, and themes, from traditional stone sculptures to minimalist steel and concrete installations, as well as sound and site-specific pieces. But still a little bit of history. So the founding of the Sculpture Center in Orońsko, officially called the Sculptures Creative Work Center since 1969, and is linked with an all-open-air sculpture project that has been carried out in the Kielce region since 1965. The initiator and vigorous organizer of this undertaking was the was the board of the sculpture section of the Association of Polish Artists, and which thus undertook to implement an earlier program for the development of outdoor sculpture. Its overriding aim was to revive and socialize Polish sculpture and to create conditions for work in durable materials, above all in the traditional stone, which is the most difficult, but at the same time, the most wonderful material for sculptures. Almost simultaneously with the commencement of the 1965 plein air event, Orońsko also came under its influence and soon gained the rank of the main plein air center. The choice of this location was motivated by geographical considerations, its central location, easy accessibility from Warsaw and many cities, as well as the proximity of technical and material facilities, in the particular the Szydłowiec construction stoneworks, in addition to the brand artistic traditions of Orońsko and the beauty of the entire historic manor and park complex, which at the time was being misused, neglected, and deeply ruined. The relative ease of adapting the ensemble for sculpture was also in favor of this choice. In 1965, the first open-air action event called Sculpture Encounters took place. Back then, 13 artists translated their ideas directly into Kielce marble, sandstone, and Pińczów limestone, working over the summer months in quarries in Bolechowice, Szewce, Pińczów, and Szydłowiec. And those are cities and villages in different regions of Poland. So the output of the first event was exhibited in Orońsko in grounds of this neglected back then park. And the exhibition was the first major attempt to confront the artistic work and the material it was made of with the nature of the surroundings, with light, greenery, architecture, and open space. As a complete novelty, it generated considerable public interest. It also became the starting material, the subject of the final meeting, a conference of specialist participants of the open-air workshop, architects from major cities of the country, representatives of workplaces, social organizations, and local authorities. The discussion initiated at the meeting back in 1965 continued and covered the problems of plein air work, and on the example of the exhibition open in Orońsko, the issues of the sculpture for open space. The final meeting was closed with the anonymous opinion of the participants on the outstanding role of sculpture as an element co-creating the space in which contemporary man lives. The aesthetic qualities of sculpture and the emotional charge contained in it were recognized as a momentous ingredients in the conscious shaping of urbanized space and recreational and landscape areas. The popularization of this view was the driving force behind the subsequent increase in the country's demand for sculpture in urban settlements, industrial areas, parks and leisure parks, which was sustained by various events and propaganda campaigns. And here also it would be important to know the backstage of the 70s and the plans for building a lot of communist blocks of flats. And back then the sculpture was really needed to make the living landscape more interesting. So in 1966, the Provincial National Council in Kielce approved a program for development and dissemination of culture, and to strengthen and internationalize the open-air sculpture event. And also that was the moment of the creation of Sculpture Center in Orońsko. The center's program evolved from both the experience and current practice of outdoor sculptures. It was assumed from the outset that the center would specialize in outdoor sculpture. These assumptions imposed certain spatial premises and technical requirements, as well as exhibition possibilities and needs. In general, it was assumed that the center would be made up of the following elements: a material and technical base, studios for studio work, individual and group work, a place for meetings, conferences, and discussions, and an outdoor exhibition providing an up-to-date overview of the current results of sculptors' work on the subject. Thus, it was envisaged that conditions would be created that would enable the performance of creative tasks and exceed the parameters of the average individual sculpture studio, with adequate natural light, the chance to organize work in an open space, providing free access, and at the same time, the possibility of physical and mental distance from the work in progress. The center was intended to provide the comfort of simultaneously undertaking studio and ancillary work in individual studios and envisaged technical studios which were to include all materials and techniques used in contemporary sculpture. It was assumed that the technical and material conditions for working in stone, wood, metal, plastics, and ceramics would be organized, that warehouses of basic sculptural materials would be established, and that the studios would be equipped with appropriate technical equipment and a wide range of tools, including tools for mechanized work and transport equipment. These assumptions were dominated by stone and sculptors work in it. The organization of work in wood and metal was quite clearly set out. On the other hand, other techniques and materials were considered alternatively on the assumption that the initiative would find understanding, material, and technological assistance from relevant scientific institutions, scientific and experimental establishments, and above all, industry. In addition to the program included the use of the park and adjoining land, which was designed to be more favorably shaped for the exchange exhibition of outdoor sculptures. The authors of the concept for the center were aware of the enormity and complexity of this program and consequently spread its implementation over a period of years, but did not specify tighter deadlines and did not specify the material feasibility of the program, said nothing about the renovation of the ensemble's facilities, and it is pure wishful thinking to say that the technical studios would need to be subsidized by industrial institutions. The Center of Polish Sculpture was faced with the task of embracing the problems of contemporary Polish sculpture, creativity, the activities of sculptors, and creative circles. Arriving at this program led through several years of experience of the functioning Museum Center of Polish Sculpture. This name functioned between 81 and 85. That was a time of searching for the fullest program and organizational formula for the institution. This search was, however, accompanied by various limitations, including an extremely modest premises base, as well as the destructive role of authorities of the Association of Sculpture Antiques, opposed the center's development. The most important and the largest building here on the slide is, of course, the Museum of Contemporary Sculpture. It was opened in 1992, and the building was erected on the site of old farm buildings. The word museum does not quite capture the character of this gallery over an area of almost 700 square meters. It exhibits works by artists who have little in common with museum dimension, if we think about Ksawery Dunikowski or Magdalena Abakanowicz. So the museum was built according to the design of Wojciech Gęsiak in a style referring to the palace architecture, the first one in the slides. The building situated on the Cascada Pond closes the communication and landscape axis of the center. Its interior performs exhibition, storing, and office functions. The most important space in the whole gallery hall, where the key problems exhibitions are presented, and those are figure in the Polish sculpture of the 19th and 20th centuries, worrying men on the urgency to create visions, as well as individual exhibitions for artists like Henry Moore, Tony Krag, Magdalena Abakanowicz, Ksawery Dunikowski. What gives the room unique character is the brick walls, mighty X-shaped pillars bearing copper ceiling of reinforced concrete, and a floor made of wooden blocks. And coming back briefly to the park exhibition, in 1994, it was extensively rebuilt to a design by Grzegorz Kowalski. And compared to the previous exhibition, 80 works and 74 authors were eliminated, including 44 sculptures by foreign artists As a result, the exhibition gained greater clarity and transparency, and the contributing works represent the high level of contemporary garden sculpture. Geographically, the exhibition mainly covers European sculpture, including a considerable amount of work by Western European artists. Compared to earlier exhibition, the present one is distinguished by a greater material diversity of the works on display. It is true that the stone still dominates, mainly sandstone, Kielce marbles, and Silesian granites, but there are also works in bronze, cast iron, sheet metal, and profiled steel, and many other materials up to ceramics, wood, earth, and water. In addition to classical sculpture, there are experimental works, installations, even ecological works. All the works were born and shaped there in Orońsko in recent years. And like still to sum up everything, in 2021, the center celebrated the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the institution. The beginnings of the presence of contemporary sculpture in this Józef Brand's estate in Orońsko, as I said, goes back to the middle 1960s, to this group exhibition of 13 artists. And however, the name, the Center of Polish Sculpture, was again renamed in 1985 to the Center of Polish Sculpture in Orońsko. And the program plans of the new institution of culture were extraordinarily progressive in the context of contemporary institutional reflection. They involved setting up the Center for Sculptures, Creative Work, the Center of Documentation and Information, the Center for the Studies of Sculpture Exhibitions, Center for Artistic Collection and Exhibitions, Center for Social Cultural Services, and Administrative and Financial Center. The organizational rules and regulations of the Museum Center included the idea of combining the place of creative work with documenting academic and exhibition tasks, as well as with social activities. The center appeared in the period of the first Solidarity movement, which explains the high priority given to social aspects of the institutional activity, expressed in designing a separate department. What draws attention is also considering scholarly reflection on sculpture exhibitions, which was much ahead of the time. In the period following the introduction of the martial law in Poland, and that was early 80s, the implementation of the policy encountered critical difficulties, but 40 years later, most of these tasks are implemented by the present center. And now, of course, the program was accompanied by a huge investment program. The buildings really go through the renovation. There was another change and breakthrough in 1989, and the first chairman was Professor Jan Berdyszak, who defined the direction of the program activity of the center for the 90s. And back then, it became really crucial to the crucial determinant was the particular care of the youngest generation of sculptors. In 1992, the first edition of the Young Triennale was held. Around the center, a whole community of artists and theoreticians appeared, and cooperation with art academics and partner institutions was successfully established. So the present day of the center involves attention to the preservation and enrichment of the legacy of the 4 decades of its activity. Redecoration and modernization of sculpting studios was a continuation of the investment program. At present, a new building of the woodworking shop is being built, thanks to which rooms in the Museum of Contemporary Sculpture will be vacated for the storeroom designed for studying sculpture. And this last slide is just to bring you to your knowledge that was this year, that was the only institution in Poland which received extreme funding also from European Union, and now the museum is closed until 2026, and now the renovation is taking space. And I think that is my last slide, and I think that's all.
That was impressive. Thank you, Maria, and also thank you for keeping your talk within schedule. Let's see if the technical problems with Sara are already solved. And then we will have a comparison and comments of both of you and your study cases together.
I am greeting you from the Middelheim Museum, which is a place where nature, architecture and art have grown together over the years. We are a museum at the outskirts of the town of Antwerp in Belgium, and our unique setting is a listed cultural heritage landscape. Our public collection of modern and contemporary sculpture is mainly presented in the open air of a freely accessible public park. And our visitors range from neighbors walking their dogs or joggers to art lovers, and from local school children to international tourists. We are a municipal organization, so we are embedded in the city administration, but we are largely funded by the Flemish community. And here in Belgium, they are the ones that hand out the official museum label, and we are an ICOM member as well. The museum was founded in 1950, and since then, and also since 65, together with the Middelheim Promotors, which is a very generous group of friends and sponsors of the museum, we have been developing the collection. And the collection is very much set out as an international sculpture collection for the outdoors. And the idea was to collect the art of our own time with its most important predecessors. So the collection starts around Rodin, more or less, and goes all the way to the present. It's quite a large collection and a large endeavor. And I will take you in a very high pace through the origin story of our museum, or of the location where we are. But mainly I would like to talk to you about a more recent history since the museum's foundation in 1950. And I would also like to zoom in even more on our most recent developments. I think Maria and we share a lot of worries and challenges, although we are also very different, I think. All right. From the Middle Ages to the 16th century, and our location was a farm that was connected or associated with a monastery. And from there on, over the centuries, the property was given over to rich farmers from generation to generation, often with a clergyman and a connection to the monastery in the family. By the 16th century, the estate had developed into a so-called court of pleasure. So a country house, really, for rich citizens of the city. For instance, by the 17th century, it was owned by a tradesman who was also the mayor of Antwerp. And then in the 18th century, the owners asked the famous landscape architect Barnabé Guimard to rebuild the castle and to design the grounds around it. And he designed the building and the courtyard with its different surrounding houses as we still have it today. And I will not go into further detail about all these owners and all the different developments they created, although that can be a lecture in itself. We've had knights collecting orchids, and we had important noblemen writing fables and animal stories. It's a beautiful collection of individuals. But I think for now it is good to remember that from a very early stage, the forming of the landscape was taken into firm hands by the residents here, and that they valued the park and its meaning very much. In 1910, the city of Antwerp decided to create an immense public park by merging former military grounds on one hand and 3 private aristocratic domains on the other. Responding to the suffocating urban conditions of the time, it is the time of rapid industrialization, the city sought to preserve what they saw as the lungs of Antwerp. In this green sanctuary, nature could nourish the well-being of the city's residents. However, concern was expressed that at the time, the masses, in particular working class people in the city, would not consider nature a safe public space at that time. We were looking at this very differently than now. And that they had lost all connection with nature and would not feel welcome in these formerly exclusive gardens. So some elements were added, and in this photograph you can see on the left hand there is an armed guard that had to give people a sense of security. On the right hand you can see some nurses in uniform having a break at the park's benches, and in the middle you can see a big vase, because there was thought about elements that could attract people to the parks, and an opportunity to sit and to walk and even to fish or to row a boat on the ponds was an option, but also art came into the picture here. And now we skip 2 world wars and we fast forward to 1950. At that point, an ambitious international exhibition of modern sculpture marked the reopening of the restored park after extensive war damage. And 150,000 visitors went to see the summer show, which was inspired by similar international exhibitions in London, in Battersea Park and Sonsbeek, but also by notions concerning the need for post-war healing of the city residents. And the success of the event led to the establishment of a permanent museum that same year, pioneering the concept of a permanent public collection of modern and contemporary sculpture in the open air setting of a free public park. The original show was made by the then mayor Lode Kruijbecks, who was personal friends with people like Henry Moore and Osip Zatkin. And the story or the legend in the museum goes that it was Zatkin who has said to the mayor, "You will feel orphanized if you let all these works go again after the show, so you have to make a collection and try to keep them here." And this is what happened. From 51 off, Middelheim Museum also organized biennials, so every 2 years there was a big show with new works coming in, mainly oriented towards a national representation, but sometimes also thematic presentations, and that went on until 89. And since then, the museum has not only been growing its collection, but it's also been expanding. So the museum grounds have covered more and more parts of the city. There we go. So to put it simply, public art in 1910, when we think back to the picture with the vase, then public art seemed subordinate to public nature in urban policies on well-being. And after 1950, we see a shift to the logic of the art museum, and that reverses this view, making the park subservient to the needs of art. And Middelheim Museum was then dedicated to presenting an international art historical overview of sculpture. And here you can see some examples. And at that time, the museum, or the park rather, was seen as a green museum building. So a passive backdrop of vegetation that needed design, especially for modern art. And so constructions and pavilions popped up, plantings were subordinate scenography. And each sculpture needed its ideal green background. In the 20th century, the autonomy of the individual artwork and the freedom of placement by artists on one hand or by the museum staff on the other hand seemed paramount. However, this way of working that was very much adopted from a classical museum setting and a classical museum of working is very hard to maintain in an open air setting. In conversation, art and nature were often framed as conflicting, opposing. And here, for instance, you can see a beautiful sculpture by Luciano Fabro, which is The Bathers, and it is set in a pond in the water, but it is here also completely covered in goose shit. So by the year 2000, the dual identity of art museum on the one hand and park on the other seemed very much disconnected, if not actually at war. But also the visitors' experience seemed to be struggling with the duality of the public park and the museum space. The museum is freely accessible like any city park, but it has opening and closing hours like a museum. And you're allowed to do more here with us than in most museums, but less than in public spaces. You can sunbathe in your underwear among the artworks. You can sit and read a book. You can teach your child to ride a bike. Even you can run. You can talk out loud or even sing at the top of your lungs. You can walk in and out freely. You can bring your dog. You can move your chair into the sun or just into the shadow like you want. But there's also many things that are not allowed. You cannot drive your motorbike through the park. You cannot leave or take objects. You cannot let your dog pee on artworks or climb on an artwork to make a selfie. You cannot throw frisbees and balls. You cannot have a barbecue, etc. And we are closed on Mondays, like most museums in Flanders. So this duality has sometimes led to a mild form of schizophrenia. For the city department, the green department of the city rather, it was not enough of a park because fences and opening hours limit accessibility and they fragment the larger green space of the park area. And also the artworks and installations and pedestals, they could form a burden on tree roots, for instance. And all this dynamic was disturbing the wildlife. This is a nice example of our wildlife. According to the standards of the sector of the Contemporary Art Museum, we weren't enough of a museum. The art on display stayed in the same spot for decades, instead of, like in a traditional contemporary art museum, rotating through careful selection. And our surroundings of the artworks change daily, whereas in a classical museum, our surroundings are supposed to be staying controlled and permanent. And there was often even a mockery about the motivation of our museum visitors. Were they really there for the art, or were they just there for a stroll? Were our critics right? The museum as a white cube, as a temple separating art from daily life, where visitors move in silent reverence, is indeed very far from our reality here. And in the last decades, the museum has seemed deeply uncertain. Should we be more like a museum, or should we be more like a park? However heated this debate became within the organization, but also in some of the specialized press, in the meantime, our visitors, they did not seem to share our questions. On TripAdvisor, for instance, we are referred to as both Middelheim Museum and Middelheim Park. But under both descriptions, people expressed their appreciation for the combination of park and art. And further research and visitor surveys confirmed this. So realizing that this contradiction existed only in the minds of us and the professionals in the field was actually our first step out of this existential doubt. We let go of the opposition and we sought ways to bring nature and culture closer together. And during COVID, the realization became even more clear. Thanks to being a park, we were the only museum in the whole country that remained open throughout the pandemic. Visitors loved the combination of physical freedom in the park and the inspiration from the arts, especially during a time dominated by a single conversation topic. And an interesting group of visitors came into view, one we had maybe taken for granted until then. We called them the rechargers. People who visit the museum for a contemplative and/or a restorative experience to recharge their batteries, so to speak. And COVID highlighted a more vulnerable side of our visitors and city residents, and we decided to embrace this aspect more in the future and develop this caring side of our work more fully in our programs. We realized that we could combine two things that help strengthen resilience, either preventatively or as a part of an active recovery process. Access to a large green space and access to inspiring, creative ways of seeing the world. And this has actually been the motor behind new collaborations with our neighbors. We have a big hospital and a psychiatric hospital for children and young people right next to the museum, and we are now working together and developing new projects together. So this was one new insight, but there was another one. At the same time, the vulnerability of nature itself and the need to strengthen its resilience became a theme in our work. The long-term perspective is important. What are we passing on to future generations? How do we ensure that this green space remains and retains its quality just like we want it for the collection? The climate challenges are real and they call for a new approach to green management, but also for new ways and creative ways of managing our collection, so we can increase the park and the collection's resilience in the face of future challenges. We realized that we couldn't just work on human resilience, but also engage our visitors in conversations about resilience of nature. The museum's public programs can be a tool to inform people and highlight the special value of this green space. And these insights opened new potential again. Just as we unlock the meaning of the artworks for our visitors, we also start sharing the meaning of our natural environment. And in our public engagement, we are providing information not only about the artworks, but also about the most remarkable trees, for instance, and landscape features. And in 2023, we took it one step further even. Today, we decided to completely renew the collection presentation, which, as we were going along, we found out why nobody has thought of doing that in the last 75 years. It was quite an endeavor. But today, for the first time in 75 years, we are creating a thematic collection presentation centered on the idea of the inseparable connection between humans or culture on one hand and nature on the other. And 4 themes inspired by 4 types of landscape in the park elaborate on that idea. So we have 4 zones that explore these 4 themes. There is one that we call fusion, and that really investigates different ways in which humans and nature are completely intertwined. We have a theme that is called urban wilderness, where we explore human fantasies about the wild with our collection. We have a beautiful zone which we have titled Human Nature, where we investigate the nature of humanity and its changing attitudes towards its environment and its other human beings. And we have a zone which is called Movements, where we combine works that investigate the cyclical changes in nature, like the movements of planets and seasons. And here you can see Antony Gormley's Firmament. And thus, the theme of nature and culture, or nature and humanity, is taking center stage in our collection presentation. And it will become the starting point for future public offerings, guided tours, workshops, opportunity for play and for reflection. And we can use the same methods, slowing down, observing, drawing on our own experiences, being curious, to both understanding nature and appreciating art. So that's where we ended up last year. And since then, we've also opened a renewed collection pavilion for some of the indoor pieces that we have, smaller works in the collection, but also the museum library is integrated there. We have a new visitor information center and shop in the former library. So now people can actually find us to ask some questions. But we have also installed new signs everywhere. There is a new digital platform which you can access through our website, and an extensive public program to help our visitors understand the meaning and vision of the artworks and the artists, but also the park. And there is still a lot to be done, but the days that we doubted if we were a real or a good museum are very much behind us. And so next year, we are ready to celebrate our 75th birthday as a garden of ideas and stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. That was also impressive. And as well, thank you for keeping your time.
Yes, you warned us well.
Well, let's hope everything goes well now with the conversation.
Yes.
Maybe some people have some questions already. I do. I just have a couple of questions, one for each. And then like that, we can follow with Nicole and anybody wanted to take part. One question for Maria first, because we saw plenty of works in Sara's presentation with labels, and I am aware of that because I know Middelheim Museum of Open Air Sculpture, and I love that the museum labels accompanying every single work, and also panels and signs. What about horoscope? Because there was just one example when I could spot the label, the museum label, together with the work of art. Is this an exception, or you were looking for the angle to make the photo more aesthetic and less museological?
It was hard to capture sometimes the works of art because sometimes you wouldn't be able to enter the grass, and the truth is that the labels would be hidden in the grass. So I do have
they are there.
Yeah. So they are there, but like somewhere hidden, very small, but they do have also a catalog.
Right, of course, yes, and I suppose in the website as well there will be further information. Without that, that is the basis of a museum. And a question for Sara as well. Well, you said that selfies were prohibited, and I was shocked because more museums. In the Prado, for example, you cannot take pictures, and in Greek museums you cannot take selfies. You can take pictures, but not selfies.
No, that's not the case at all. No, you can take as many pictures as you like, but we prefer you not to climb the works when you take a selfie. And we actually, if you go on Instagram and you do #Middelheim you can find a whole collection of people putting their dogs on top of sculptures for the Instagram of the dog or for their own Instagram. So this is the balance that we are trying to find. On the one hand, we very much cherish the fact that we are an informal place and that people feel free to let loose a little bit. But the safety of the sculptures is, of course, also a concern. So when people are climbing it or putting their child on it or their dog on it, we say, please don't do that. So this is the balance that we are trying to find. But you can make as many pictures as you want if it's not for commercial purposes.
I'm glad that both questions were positive, with positive answers. I don't know if Nicole has any other questions or members of the public.
I just wanted to share the fact that both of you seem to have really very closely integrated the environment and the sculpture, and not separating both, and really trying to integrate both one into each other, even with the different building inside the house, outside the house, and making it as social as possible. And I think it showed very nicely during COVID, with the Middelheim being the only one museum open, and really convincing people that a sculpture park can be a very important center for well-being. So it's not really a question, it's just an admiration for both of your work. So
thank you. But it has been a slow development. I think as I've been at the museum quite a long time already. I started there as a very young curator in 2005. And we had a different director then. And then in that area, it wasn't the case at all. the museum was still very much considered a green decor for the collection. And our director, he was really allergic to works that would be biomorphic or would integrate natural elements or would even have a subject matter that had anything to do with nature. So he really was looking for the contrast very much, and you can see that still in the collection also. But during COVID, COVID was a plague, of course, and a horrible thing in many, many, many ways. But it was also a time where everything slowed down. And we were planning at that time, in 2020, a big international exhibition, and that nobody could fly, no works could be transported. So we couldn't do all that. And then we had time for some scientific research also, and we had a historic research done towards the history of the museum space. So the history of the guards, and so this is why I can tell you of the owners until the Middle Ages, because it was all investigated, but it also brought to light the very specific heritage value of this park and of this place, and the fact that actually people had been building since the Renaissance, had been building on this relationship between nature and humans in this location. And we found that so fascinating that this was a story that we wanted to share more with our visitors. So that's what kind of set it in motion. But also a second motor, I think, behind this movement was that we had a big visitor survey done in the same period. And we still had visitors who were standing in the middle of the museum asking us, so where's the museum, please? Could you direct us in the direction of the museum? Because they were always looking for this big, this big facade with the high stairs, and then there was nowhere to be found. So we thought, like, we need to clarify this. We need to clarify this, and then we did a big survey in our visitors and asking, like, what is it a museum? Is it a park for you? And then people were like, that's a stupid question. I mean, we don't care. We like the fact that it's both. We like the fact that it's a combination of the two, and that you cannot find that in so many places, and that it's different from a classical museum. So we decided to embrace it instead of choosing a side.
Well, this is a great job. It's a museological task that you are doing, because you are teaching people that a museum is not just the building.
No, exactly. And that's what I think is...
It is true that museums more and more tend to explain also about the setting. No? If you go to the Louvre, you will be taught about the Salon Carré and the importance of the Grand Galerie and so on, explaining also about the history of the setting. It is also good to respect the setting as you are doing, and to try to explain also this natural setting. But then comes my question, no? Taking about the Nicole's argument of the conglomerate of nature and art, because as you said, some of the artworks were site-specific. They were designed for a specific spot in your park. So now that you are moving around the pieces according to thematic issues, are you moving all these pieces as well? No. Okay.
No, we are. So there is a part of the collection that is really site specific, and those are mostly works that were done from the 90s until today. Contemporary artists tend to be very site responsive, site specific, but the collection starts so much earlier, and then it was mainly studio work. So works were acquired that were made in an artist studio. They were not site specific, and you can see copies of some of our works, for instance, our King and Queen by Henry Moore. It is inside in the Tate Modern, and it is built into a niche in the wall. So it's a very different way of presenting it than with us. But we did try to keep into account if the artist had specific instructions about the installation of the work. For instance, we have letters from Henry Moore saying that the artwork has to be presented with green in its back. So and
as a screen, yeah,
with a green
natural
surroundings
screen.
and natural surroundings. So don't put it in front of a building, but put it in front of a plain or a field or trees. So this is something that we kept into account. So if we knew about also before the site responsive works, the older works, if we knew about specific instructions by the artist, we kept those into account when we were finding new locations for it. And sometimes also the preservation of the artwork was a reason to give it a certain location. For instance, the polar bear by Pompon, it was in the green before. It was in the park underneath the trees, but because it was not getting enough sunlight, it turned green all the time. There was a lot of algae forming on the stone, so we decided to move it into a much more sunny spot and away from the trees a little bit, so it remains a white bear. But now we also have visitors who say, it's become a monument of climate change because these polar bears in urban surroundings, they're like ravaging human villages or human camps. So people are now making whole new meanings for the pieces in the collection. It's very interesting to see.
Now let's turn to Maria about these changing presentations or changing meanings in the museum collection and the setting, because I was struck by the fact that at the beginning, when everything started in the 60s, it was more open, no? It was a time for International Sculpture Symposium. But then you said, if I understood, that in the 1990s, they decided to turn this into a national collection, taking out most of the foreign works. So maybe because it's a national museum, it's a more nationalist, no? It's more for Polish sculptures, I don't know. I'm just asking because I don't know if I got it well.
No, you got it right. I mean, the thing is that during 70s, the international part of, I went also to archives to look at the files, what kind of artists they had. You know, I love archives, and many, of course, they had it from Eastern Bloc. So there are a lot of artists from Czechoslovakia back then, and so on. So everyone from Sofia, Belgrade. So people were really transferring back then. And I was just wondering, because I didn't find any explanation why. I mean, the park right now has a lot of sculptures, and I was just thinking maybe just because still more Polish sculptors are going there, and they're producing so many works of art, that when I was talking with the director, he was, for example, complaining that there is always a problem to find the fundings for the storage. And it's really, the works of art are really big, so maybe for them it was like really easier and quicker to find a spot for the works of art that was already produced there. But they do have a storage. It's not that they do throw away things, they just put it to the storage and then they change. But which were taken away, which not, I would need to dig in deeper into that. But I do not think also that it's very nationalistic approach they have. They do have international artists and Japanese artists as well, not only from Eastern or Western Europe and so on. So it is pretty international representation of nationalities.
What they both have, both examples, are also buildings, and that's I will say a different issue in sculpture parks, no? Like in the US, in Canada, in England. There are more museums, your cases, or those I know, no? Like Leganés in the outskirts of Madrid, or Santo Tirso close to Porto. These are good examples of open air sculpture, but with places to present small works or fragile or temporary exhibitions or the library and all sorts of services that need to be under a roof. So, and it's also good because in people's mentality, a museum still is sort of a building, no? So they are both open air, but not totally open air, no? There is a part for the storage and for other services. What about the didactic presentations? I don't know. Are they also presenting explanations in other languages apart from Polish? Maria? Yes?
Yes, of course, English. That would be English. Yeah.
Oh. I wonder if there are any more questions. I don't want to monopolize the discussion. how can we control in the chat?
I wanted to ask, because from the Mittelheim, I know how pioneering they have been with their education department and work. But I would like to know more about that with Maria. What combination do you have, or which collaboration do you have between curators and public service, or being in contact and communication with the public? Do you have a special education department, or how do you do all your publicity, your telling the public what they need to know?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Just to clarify, I do not work there. I just went there for my research.
Yes, I know.
Mm-hmm. But I was also asking this question. So the director, for example, right now, he's also a professor in the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw. It was my first time in Radom. I did find it difficult to get there just because I don't have my own car. So I needed to use the bus, and I was also asking him, so who is coming? And he told me, for example, that there are only 15 students of sculpture taken to Warsaw. So because I was, this is also necessary that those students are going there and practice their sculpting skills. The program of education, he also interviewed him, and he started with anecdote, and he said to me, just to tell you, I know it's a village, but it's not quite like in the village. There is a lot of going on. They do have a few magazines that they are publishing. Also going back then to the 70s, 80s, I also looked at those publications, and the quality of them is pretty high, scholarly thinking. And from the very beginning, they were organizing those symposium conferences. And also part of my PhD is to argue that actually back then in communist Poland, it was really easier to make something proper without not much censorship outside of Warsaw. So basically Orońsko or Radom, I am actually researching Łódź. Those were the places where things were really happening, and censorship from Warsaw or party people wouldn't really necessarily go there. In Warsaw, it was more difficult, to have any kind of exhibitions. But the place really itself maintains a lot of place also for sculptors, exactly to make a fire in outside of the buildings and chat and really exchange the ideas. And education, what I've observed on the website right now, still they do continue with open calls for subjects really connected to sculpture and to sculpture mainly. And what I've noticed, actually, those are like Polish-speaking conferences with people from Poland. So that for sure it could be more, because in my opinion, the museum is impressive, but maybe like broadening it scholarly into other countries, they still probably would need to work on that. It's not that internationalized, but websites in English and Polish, both languages.
Thank you.
Accessibility is a big issue, I think. No?
Yes.
And it's also, but it's not only your problem. Many of the museums and in parks open in the high modernity were just for the bourgeois having a car and going out with the family. And sometimes they also charge, because both of your museums are free of charge, I understand. But if you go to Van Ave Museum in Otterlo, it's not only difficult to access, you have also to pay for the park first, and then to pay for the museum. So how public is this public space? Is different, no? Is another question.
The park is for free, and people exactly go there for their leisure time. It's really beautiful with water and so on, but the exhibitions you would need to pay. You just have the entry ticket. And the library, well,
temporary exhibitions, not the permanent collection.
Yes, and there there is also a guide. You can just call a guide, and like people can really go and walk you through and really pass the knowledge very well. The library is also there, but I would say it's old school. It's rather like not very user friendly. I would say that. So yeah.
Okay. I would like to add one thing to Sara's presentation. Is the interesting part that you also integrate in the general parcours of the park, the access to all the restoration of sculptures. And I think that is very also interesting for the public. Maybe I haven't seen it now for many years, so I don't know how far you are now, but I was very impressed in the time I visited. I think it was with the Art Academy before I retired, so at least 10 years, no, 8 years ago. But I found it was interesting to integrate in the general parcours of the park the fact that the sculptures can deteriorate and they need to be restored, and what is done, and give access to the public to see what is being done.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of what we do. You know, in a classical museum, when something is broken or something needs to be exchanged or installed or deinstalled, they close the doors, they do it behind closed doors. And then when everything is finished and polished again, you open the doors and then you can see the show. In Middelheim Museum, we don't work like that. We have no backstage. So everything we do, all the museum work is conducted in front of the visitors. We also, when we are making a new exhibition or deinstalling, we don't close the museum. We keep it open as much as we can. So people are really following all these processes, restoration processes, but also exhibition making processes. And they come up very close to the artist. We very often have that an artist is installing his work or her work, and that our visitors are really up in their nose asking like, yeah, what are you doing? And are you sure you want to do it like that? They're very outspoken here in Antwerp. And also with our restoration team, a lot of these works can be restored in place. And it's much better for the work not to move it too much, but to restore it there, but also wax layers and such stuff like preventional works are done in place. And then we work together a lot with students actually of the academy that you are talking about as interns, and are working with our team. And they can ask questions, or they can answer questions also of the audience who are interested in what are these processes and what does it serve, etc. This is something that we've been also now taking a step further into an open air storage space. So we, for the new collection presentation, we took out about 100 works that were in the park presented. But to make this story of the zones and the collection presentation clear, we took also out a lot of works, because every year there were works added, but in some places they were really crowding out each other and you couldn't really understand or read the works very well anymore. So they had to go into storage, and we decided that if they can be in an outdoor situation, we will make an outdoor storage space, because it is both economically and ecologically much better than to build a building that you have to keep at a certain temperature and that you have to keep at a certain humidity level and at a certain light level. If they can be outside, then they are. Some of them are individually packed. So if there is frost and water is, if water from like rain, if it gets on a sculpture and a sculpture is from stone, and then it starts freezing, then the water can, if it turns into ice, it can really, Maria, I'm sure has found that out in her studies as well, then it can be really damaging for stonework. So stoneworks are wrapped in the winter time on this open air depot, and this is all opportunities to explain to the public, like, why are we and how are we taking care of these artworks. And that is really also, for a long time, I kept looking at this as a disadvantage, like, we don't have a backstage, etc., etc. But at a certain point, you understand that this can also be an advantage to be able to be transparent and to take people into the what and why of the museum work. And this is really interesting, I think. This is what I like about it.
Yeah.
Also, what about marketing? No, because especially for Maria, since Orozco is farther away. After all, Middelheim is now part of the suburbs of Antwerp, and is more or less well connected. But some of the strategies, for example, in Leganés, they do it like that. There is an anthem in the city center, and then they make publicity about the changing exhibitions, and they give programs, and then this attracts people. And this is very important in general for every museum, but particularly for these museums in the open air, because their main importance, I will say, is to create new publics and to expand the publics of art. No, you will find by chance people walking around and discovering their interest for art, and then they may go to other museums. So it's very important to do marketing and to bring new people. Also for Sara, the question is about the students. I remember there is a university close by. So do you interact with the students to bring them in, or
Yes.
to make lectures in the open air, or seminars or whatever?
Yes, more and more we do that. We did in 2020. We were working on an exhibition which was called Congoville, which deals with the colonial heritage of Middelheim as a space. Because actually next to the Middelheim Museum, which is now the headquarters of the university, but it was in the previous century, it was the school where all the civil servants were trained that were then sent off to Congo to handle the colony there. And Middelheim, the grounds of the museum, before it became a museum, it was a training ground for this school. So the people were training there how to survive in Africa, which is a really weird thing if you think about it. But this whole shared history brought us closer together. And so with the dean of the university and the artists that were making the show in Middelheim Museum, we really worked together, and artists also showed their work within this building of the university. But yeah, we also we exchange a lot. For instance, now we are working on a new entrance for the museum on the side of the university and the hospital. Because actually we were approached by doctors from the psychiatric hospital for children and youngsters who said, like, we see a lot of potential for healing when our young people would have access to both the collection and the art and the artists and the park. But if they have to enter now, they have to, because there's a fence, they have to make a detour, and it takes them about 20 minutes to go around to enter the museum. And if they have therapy sessions of 1 hour, that doesn't make any sense. So they asked, let's make an entrance together, and then we are doing that together also with the university, who have the Department of Medicine and Health. So they are making a study out of this case. They also have a department which does design, like design for public space or design for products. So they are entering, and now we are together with the doctors and the children themselves, we are developing a new entrance. There's also an artist coming in to make an artwork together. So this is all these different parties coming together to find a way of making space together. And I think this is very interesting, that artists can be very much a part of a network of all kinds of expertise to make a part of the city together. And I think this is a very interesting way of working.
Quite so. And
we
Maria,
are learning a lot.
What would you say about these outreach services in Orozco? Do they just sit there waiting for people to come, or do they just try to bring new public? The interesting point in your case is that they work with artists. No, they bring artists. There is also a hotel or lodgement or whatever for contemporary artists to live there for a while, no, and they could interact with people, and this will bring another chance for better, deeper communication with these outsiders, this kind of new publics. So
Well, the biggest city around Oronsko is Radom, but I arrived there on a rainy day. No one knew what I'm talking about when I couldn't even find a bus station. And you know, I come from Eastern Poland. The whole Western Poland is laughing from Eastern Poland how like backwards we are. But then you know, I came down there and I was horrified. So I think it's still very, you know, and I didn't know about this center before you came with the idea, you know, of museums in the villages. So I started to research what is there in Poland. So I don't think they have very good outreach. I think for sculptures and you know, experts on sculpture, it is accessible. People would know about it, obviously. But for everyone else, no. And of course, people who are really living, this is really a village. So there are a few houses and people who are there, of course, they would go for a walk there to the park because they have nowhere else to go. It's really a small town that they would have like 2 bakeries, 1 cafe. And the hotel is great. You have to book it in advance. That's true that it's destined for sculptures, and they have special price for that. It's very cheap. I was living in the palace below the library in the cellar.
Lucky you.
Not, I was in the basement.
Okay.
And yeah, where also the gardeners and workers work. I mean, I am grateful. I didn't.
Were they living there? The gardeners.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it
luxury.
Was, yeah. So that was quite an experience, but a very beautiful one. And I'm happy I went there also in the summer, and also I was there a few days. So I think exactly what we're talking about this landscape, and it really matters when it rains, if it's sunny. You know, the light is amazing. That it can really change from minute to minute, and from your position where you walk, and you really have space. And then exactly you have these contracts of the white cube, or like the representation of the sculptures. I think you really need to also think about it if you design exhibition space and combine exactly everything together. And that was beautiful because, of course, you can meet the artists. They're working I tried to show you this in these small videos. So they're basically behind the orangery, the sculpture house, with this small glass place where they also exhibit, and behind it they really have a lot of space. But usually, exactly, there was this sign, "Don't disturb," like creative, creativity in progress. So you would not just go and start to talk to artists. Yeah.
But in any case, yes, I would say it's a strong point, a very strong point in Orozco. No? The fact that it's a place for artists to be there, to live and to work for a while, and perhaps also to meet people and talk to people. Also, I think this is something they are very aware, because as you described, there is a museum, but it's just part of this National Police Contemporary Sculpture Center, no? So they call it, the big thing is a sculptural center, and then the museum is just part of it, no? Is the creativity takes advantage over the curatorship and conservation. Maybe, I don't know. I've never been there.
I agree. Yes, I agree. Okay. I also had such impression. Yeah.
Any more questions? Or do you have questions for each other, or comparisons that you want to make to draw attention?
I was actually listening to the story about the artist in residence there, because this is something I'm actually quite jealous about, because for us the artists are also an important community. And we notice that when we bring them together, like on the opening of an exhibition, etc., they love the technical exchange. And so we are now developing a new program in the museum, which we call the Community of Makers, where we are also trying to show to the public that the artist is not such a genius in the attic somewhere, but that is really part of a network of people creating. And that's always been the case. Like also the famous sculptors like Rodin, etc., they had a very important relationship with their bronze casters, for instance, or with their assistants. And you can also see that in the collection. Like some the one sculptor has been the assistant of the previous one, or has been the teacher of the next one. And so there is a deep connection between these sculptures amongst them, I think, historically, but also today. And I think what we are now exploring, and I'd love to hear from Maria if she found out anything about this, is also the possibilities that has to attracting different kinds of schools, because I think the schooling program of the museum has been very much how do you call that, like a theoretical approach, like that it's been a lot of talking and a lot of explaining about the meaning of the, or the importance of the artwork. And so young people studying more practical stuff like welding or auto mechanics or etc., they feel like they have no business in the museum. But when you enter the conversation with them from the making point of view, I think it opens up a whole possibility of a conversation with people who would definitely who would otherwise maybe not think that the museum is a place for them. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear if you found out anything about how they are maybe making those new kinds of connections.
Well, to make new kinds of connection, probably you need to be in the place. I would say that just because of this historic mansion house, they do have places, and I think it's kind of popular in Poland. For example, I worked before in Warsaw in Ujazdowski Castle. So this is also renovated castle, and they also have residency. So for each 3 months, people from around the world are coming, and they are living in the castle and on the same floor where our offices, but we were in the castle, and and over there when I spent hours there in Orońsko, and I was walking back and forth, and it's so approachable for people interested in art. I have to say that escape Warsaw, so people from Warsaw usually would like to go somewhere out of Warsaw, and they do go there, and just while being there and asking questions exactly and stuff, you can knock to somebody's door and stuff would come out. And also I was really lucky to be there before they closed, because they closed right now for this renovation, and I could of course recognize the wooden floor that I remember from my first apartment, post-communist Poland, so it's losing right now its history. They completely are changing this, but they do have a lot of open calls, so sometimes they're booked. You need to book in advance. They do have open calls for artists to come and have those workshops, and they also have open calls for theoreticians. But exactly because it's small village, they don't have, they cannot accommodate hundreds of people. So it's really scheduled, and the criteria also for selection of works of art that are exhibited, the level is high. They, someone who gets it. But I was exactly even preparing this presentation. I was looking at, thinking that Abakanowicz was working there, and what kind of influence she had on another artist. That was the place. They were really living there together in these hotel rooms and having those. They were going there back then. They were going there for whole summer. So they had whole summer to produce something. Also, probably they were connected to fine arts in a department in Warsaw to present the work. But still the director was also saying that the most important networking is right now with this industry. So all the stories, because the works of art are extremely huge and the dimensions are big. So for him, it was always mostly thinking about that, even right now doing the renovation, how to transport these massive works of art. But network appears in the place, so you need to go there to network.
Yeah, but I think it's very interesting. I'm learning because also the connection with industry or with business life is something I think is very interesting. You don't see many museums exploring those. All museums are looking for sponsors and are approaching companies from an exchange in that respect. But it is very interesting. I'm learning now to maybe explore how you can make a relationship with companies from the maker's point of view and from the technical or the creating aspects. I find that very interesting.
It's definitely also changing landscape. I think I was also still Googling all the villages and places that I was saying in Polish, and I was just wondering where is what. And seriously, those artists back then for the marble or for the special stone, they were going to different parts of Poland. So closer to Silesia, south of Poland, close to Krakow, but also like south of Mazowsze, of Mazovian Voivodeship, which is connected to Warsaw. So really around Poland, we really need to know the geography. And sometimes we do not think, we also think about the sculpture in the park, but actually tracing the history of importing and exporting the material, and as you said, the connectivity of people who are involved into tools and providing this mechanism of being even able to produce the work of art. Yeah, it's extreme network.
Interesting.
Talking about materials, do you have artists working with nature in both cases, like a dead tree, and then they use it for as a work of art, or to produce new works of art, interrelating with nature in this way, using it as a material?
Well, they can definitely. I think I showed also in the slide that somebody just used the lines to make the swing kind of it, but I think you cannot cut the tree.
Right.
Although in some parts of Poland where I'm from, people just cutting illegally trees, but from the national parks. But I think they need to preserve the nature. So the nature is not, of course, you can somehow.
No, but put works on trees, no, like interacting in this way, in this conceptual ways.
I didn't spot anything like that. Rather,
Right.
it was exactly like leaving the nature by itself and not interrupting too much in a very humble way, just to that works of art corresponds, but really doesn't really touch or destroys or intervenes with nature.
Like in Middelheim, then that's similar.
Yeah, we have many works that are combine trees or natural elements and sculpture. There's quite a few actually.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
Works from Munoz that are hanging in trees. You have Barco d'Oro, which is a golden boat, and a tree, an existing tree, is the mast of the boat. We have a young artist who made a tree prosthesis. So she made a metal arm that can help the tree carry its branches if they fall off. We also had a residency, for instance, of an artist who was studying different kinds of plants and their medicinal value that are growing in the park. And then she made a beautiful, she was working towards a performance, and she made beautiful embroidered textile pieces about the plants that were growing in the museum. And then she did a big performance with them on the final day of her residency. So we have artists working with nature in very different ways.
And what about the way history of the museum in both cases is represented? Because they are both very historical museums, no? They were founded many years ago, and they have been changing. It's not just because nature is changing, but also the presentations, the arrangement, now thematic issues instead of historiographical. So is this explained to visitors somehow when they come, or just in the website? A short biography, I wouldn't say self-critical, but at least reflecting on the changes, the evolution of the museum as an institution and the way it has evolved.
In Polish case, I am happy I went there in person, and I do have the amazing book here that was like written by the first director, and he was a professor. It's written in Polish. But otherwise, if you go there right now, and then I was comparing to the website information, so of course it's very limited, and it doesn't give so much information. And the Polish scholarship, so you need to get into Polish scholarship. The museum went, of course, through German invasion, and then went through Bolshevik occupation, when it was, like soldiers were using it and it was cool. So you do not have this information on the walls. But at the end, like the history of this place is so complex that I think it would need probably another building just to present the history of how it was organized and occupied and changed.
For us, it's it's a bit different. We have some signing, which has like the basic information about the building, but also of the areas where we have clusters of the collection and their connection to the landscape and how it developed. So we have for a visitor who is just on site, very, very basic information present. And then we have all these kinds of maps that you can take into the museum, which is folders where there's also a bit of text in it. And then there's, of course, the library, which is a very big instrument to dive into the history of the museum. We have all these, we have many publications on the history of the museum. And also this garden historical study, which is, I think, almost 300 pages thick of the landscape and the estate and the buildings, etc., etc. So yeah, we keep finding new ways of making it accessible to the public, and also how do you say that? Like offering it in proportions that they can manage. Like you don't avalanche them with all the information. You kind of have to see where and how you disperse the information, and we're still working on that.
Yeah, just an introduction, that's all I was asking, no? Because sometimes you go there and you get more easily disoriented. It's for some people it's difficult to find your track in a museum, but even more so in an open-air museum, no, where you don't have corridors or a file of rooms. So it's good to have some orientation about the history of the place and the evolution, but also, as you said, no, some maps and guides and things like that. No,
but I think you should also actually be able to feel it on a almost an intuitive level, because and that has to do with park maintenance, for instance. I think the park has been designed in a certain way, and if it is maintained according to the historical design, then you can also still feel like what the lanes were and what the important perspectives or sites were in the landscape. But we have found that over the last decades, the green department of the city has kind of changed its policy, or they have not been keeping track of this historical perspective so much. So sometimes these important perspectives or lanes, etc., are a bit overgrown. And this is also something that we're working on. So how can you also, in terms of green maintenance, keep the landscape readable for the visitor?
Good. Well, I would like somebody from the public to make questions. I don't know if you want to participate, just raise your hand electronically or say something in the chat for other voices to be heard and for more variety.
I had a question for Sara from Middelheim Museum earlier. So you mentioned that in 2023 you reorganized and then you arranged themes. Is that now permanent, or do you plan on, I don't know, changing again? Or I know practically it's hard, I know, but do you have, I don't know, any plans on that?
No. We said to ourselves that the basics of the presentation will remain like this for 5 to 7 years, but still every year we are adding things. So we think that the story of these subjects is told by the works of the collection, but we think that artists are still developing new perspectives on these subjects. For instance, human nature, the heroes that we put on pedestals yesterday maybe have to be taken off today, or we are finding new heroes to put on pedestals, or the vulnerability of humanity, and which kinds of bodies are being represented in our collection. This is all changing so much that we keep asking contemporary artists to add to the story. So, and those can be long-term loans, or they can be short-term loans, or they can be new works to add to the collection. So the collection presentation will keep developing, but the whole of the presentation, the reshuffle, let's say, yeah, we've given us about 7 years to leave that like this.
Okay, so it is more about adding to what you've rearranged than rearranging again. And
yes, but I now say adding, but that also can mean that stuff is going out. Maybe a loan is requested for a certain work for an exhibition, and then it goes again. So it's not as fixed as it seems. The sculptures are actually dancing all the time.
okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. It's a good question.
Any other question, please?
Something outrageous. Something you really want to know. Maybe we've given them an earful already.
Okay. I don't want to force this any further. See if there are no more questions, or between you, any more comments, we can just close and say goodbye. Really?
I think so.
Julie,
No,
okay.
I don't have
You didn't
any
want to
questions,
give the
but
word to the
but-
following session.
It was very interesting. It's very clear. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentations,
Thank
Sarah
you.
and Maria. Pedro, tu donnes quelques informations, a few words about the next webinar.
About the 10th of December, we will have the third part of our project, and it will be another webinar about the sculpture gardens around museums. And I think this is quite related also with the previous topic today and the one we have last April. So it's going to round up the theme, the topic of our discussions about museums in the open earth and sculpture parks. Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there on the 10th of December.
Thank you, Pedro. And the webinar will soon be online. The webinar, this webinar, will soon be online. So, and thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all for inviting me, Pedro. Thank you so much for chasing me when I was hard to reach these last few months.
Yeah, that's our life. It's difficult.
And I hope, we stay connected somehow. I would like that very much. Please let me know all of you when you are in the neighborhood, and I will be happy to show you around.
We will, certainly. Thank you all, and congratulations. You did very well.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.